Hello and welcome to Think About That Live. I'm Aaron Hale and got an interesting program today. I hope you'll be interested in any way. A couple things before I get started. We have a guest at the house here where I'm at. My office is pretty soundproof, but that guest includes two little kids below the age of 2. So they don't know what quiet time is. So if you hear anything in the background, that's probably what it is. They're a blessing to have here. I've been enjoying watching them run around and have all that energy and wishing I had that kind of energy to get through my day. Sorry about last week. I just got so far behind on homework. I just don't like doing PowerPoints. It's just teeth grinding to get through PowerPoint assignments. Some people like them. I'm not one of those people. So I ended up a little bit behind. The professor was good to me, so I thank him for that. That's all turned in. I have one more assignment to turn in, and I'll finish my biblical hermeneutics class for this thing I'm working on here. Speaking of that, I made a book recommendation last week about the hermeneutical triad, a fantastic book. And I wanted to make another one. I had to read this book this week. It's not that big, little book here. I read it, had a couple of days to read it. And it's called Exegetical Fallacies. The author is D.A. Carson, second edition. Highly recommend it for anyone who does biblical interpretation, teaching, preaching on a regular basis. Maybe a little too academic for just your average Bible reader. Although there's some real good stuff in there if you consider yourself a thinker and want to, heighten your ability to spot problems and catch problems in yourself about how you handle the Bible. Definitely a good read. Not too bad. Just 100 or so, 150 pages or so, and pretty easy reading. Not too high of an academic level as far as the reading, so pretty comfortable to read. He covers the big four as far as exegetical problems go, and that's misusing words in the Bible, misusing the grammar of the Bible, misusing logic in general. God designed this universe to operate logically, and His Word does operate logically. It'll always logically work itself out in the characteristic of God, which is something that, it's really important actually, because Christians claim exclusivity. We're saying our God is the only God. And if you test the scriptures, they will logically support themselves over and over and over again, and the character of God will be consistent throughout them, so much so that it'll stand out from any other holy book something we're going to talk about today. But definitely highly recommend this book. Again, Exegetical Fallacies by Dr. D.A. Carson. I found it very useful, and like I said, highly recommend it for anyone who's going to be doing Bible teaching or preaching, any kind of exposition of the Bible text, and for personal use. It really will sharpen you up. It'll catch you'll notice things about how you read the text and where you put your own presuppositions and where you might have logical fallacies as you read it. So worth reading, pretty cheap to get off Amazon as well. Today I'm going to talk about I'm going to play a video. We're going to go through a video. I found it really fun the other day when I did the video on the social score system in China, and just the challenge of, that if you were in China, would your social score stand out as a Christian? I think it would. But when I say I think it would, I mean, if you're acting like Christ, it would. But today we're going to talk about thinking, and that's what this show is about. It's about thinking. That's what this program is targeted at. It's how do you think? In a world full of information continuously being thrown at you, how do you learn to filter that? How do you think about that? Christmas, for example. Have you thought through Christmas in your life? Have you decided Halloween? Have you thought through that in your family's life? Or is it just another holiday that you do this and everybody does the same thing? We've always done that. We haven't thought about it. Today we're going to look at some just really bad argumentation that is continuously thrown at Christians. And this is, I'm using this video because it is particularly bad argumentation, particularly poorly researched argumentation, and covers very, very well ad hominem argumentation and straw man argumentation. And the reason I'm doing this is because in the video, there's going to be statements made about Christians. It'll say, do you know some religious people don't believe, etc., etc., etc. And then instead, instead of, it doesn't go to any other religious group, although there are many who believe the same things. It goes straight for Christians. And that's something we should notice as we're talking about it. So this video is titled, How Dinosaurs Prove the Theory of Evolution. That's a thesis statement, and that's kind of why I clicked on the video. I actually clicked on it because it was shared by a Christian with no other proviso, that just shared on their page, and I was standing back and going, well, this is something dangerous to share without any kind of explanation of your position on it. But it just struck me today, and it was really cool because I was sitting at my desk at work asking God, what should I be talking about today? And ding, this showed up. And I was like, okay, I could do that. This is something we could talk about. So I'm going to switch over to the desktop now. And we're going to watch. And I'm going to do this. Last time I played the video all the way through. And then we talked about it. This time I'm going to stop at certain places. I haven't mapped out those places in the video. All I've done is watch through it a couple of times. And I'm going to just stop at certain places where I want to make comments. The video itself, its link is in the description for this video, and it'll be in the description of the video afterwards once it's posted on the channel. So if you want to go and watch through the video uninterrupted, you're able to do that. Especially if you're watching later, you could pause right now and go ahead and do that. But like I said, I'm going to stop a few places, and hopefully I don't give anybody whiplash stopping too often, and I can keep the flow going. We'll see how this goes. So I'm switching over to the desktop here, and I'm going to start the video.
The theory of evolution is settled science, and dinosaurs prove that.
Okay, quick stop. Notice we have a thesis statement here. The theory of dinosaurs prove the theory of evolution. This piqued my interest. As soon as I started the video, I'm like, oh, okay. What evidence are you going to present that will give me, give me information about this subject? I want to learn, and I think any Christian can approach the subject that way. Let's look where the argument goes next, and hopefully I get this right, switching back between desktop and camera, and it's going to be a workout today.
Did you know there are people out there who think dinosaurs never existed? Yep, that's a thing, and it's because of evolution.
Okay, so you're sitting here and you're piqued by an interesting thesis statement, and then the next statement is something that has absolutely nothing to do with whether the theory of evolution is true or not. So immediately you can go, well, there's not much argumentation going on here. Immediately you can say, okay, what happened here? But notice the argument shifted. The argument is now, instead of having to prove the theory of evolution, there's a presuppositional statement being made here. The theory of evolution is true, and these people are stupid because they don't believe it. We'll continue here.
And the word theory. Yes, we have hundreds of years worth of exhumed fossil evidence that proves their existence. Yes, more fossils are unearthed and more dino species are categorized every year. So why do people believe they aren't real? Well, it's mostly due to extreme religious interpretations of holy books. The basic argument against dinosaurs' existence is as follows. Dinosaurs are a hoax, and all evidence of them that has been dug up over the years is falsified. The evidence that wasn't outright faked is actually evidence of dragons, because there is mention of dragons in the Bible and other ancient texts. The main issue religions have with the theory of evolution is that it overrides the primacy of religious texts by establishing a scientific rationale for a history of species that do not need a god. Which
A lot of statements made there. A couple of things to point out. Notice that the word religions were used. The word statements, many statements were made about different types of religions, different holy books. But what was the picture? It was a Bible. What was the imagery in the background of? Well, some of it was idols, and other parts of it was Christian imagery. And so, there's immediately the statement is evolution is true. If we had this section of the video to look at and talk about, in other words, evolution is true because Christians are too stupid to believe it. This is what is being said here. Now, notice it hasn't dealt, and it will deal in some facts as we go forwards. But there's something that is important here about being a Christian and a thinker. And I want to stop. And it's easy to pick apart this argumentation. It's bad. But let's look at Christianity for a minute. This is why Christians need to be good thinkers and good expressors. This is why Peter tells us in 1 Peter chapter 3 that we are to be ready to have an answer, an apologetic, for our hope that is within us. And then he says to do it with gentleness and humbleness, that those people, so that it will shut the mouths of the naysayers. As Calvin said, and I'm quoting R.C. Sproul's interpretation, will shut the mouths of the estrepers, anyone who comes against Christianity. The reason this person has something to say, and the reason people will listen to their argument, is because there are Christians who engage in such ridiculous argumentation. Now, to point out that the interpretation that the evolutionists use of the fossil record is wrong, well, I have 160 PhDs at the Creation Science Institute and another 180 at the Institute, or the Answers in Genesis Institute, that will back me up on that statement. Scientifically back me up on that statement. You can make that statement scientifically. But when we engage in shutting our minds and not taking the time to explain what is actually going on around us in the context of Scripture, we open the door to this kind of argumentation. And unfortunately, it's been done all over. I'll just point out a large one today, that many people absolutely believe the earth is flat. If you don't believe me, just Google Flat Earth Society. You'll see a lot of it. And if you read their articles, they actually contradict themselves 3 or 4 times in their own articles. But the problem is, they quote the Bible to prove the theory. So instead of taking the evidence that God has created a universe so vast that we can't even see the end of it, and explaining it as his glory, it comes down to the translation of a Hebrew word about sphere in Isaiah. And because sphere can be translated circle or sphere in Hebrew, it's obviously circle, and the earth is a flat circle. Notice I'm picking on Christians here. That's what this show is about. That's what we're talking about here. We talk about Christian thinking. Of course, there's all kinds of bad thinking in the world. There's all kinds of delusion, and as Paul tells us in Romans chapter 1, down near verse 18 and on, that God gave those over, all the humans, over to delusional thinking. Delusional thinking in the world is not surprising. But when you claim to be a member of God's kingdom, you should be working on a regular basis resolving that delusional thinking, not knowing what happened on the last popular episode of whatever TV show you watch. This kind of argumentation, the reason it sticks is because we give it opportunity to stick when we don't think. and we don't think out loud, and we don't think in public, and we don't, when if they were picking on, what some kid thought, everybody would be like, what are you doing? That person's just a kid. But when they can provide substantial evidence that there are many Christians who deny the reality of the world around them, in other words, deny the reality of the senses that God gave them, it doesn't shut the mouths of the estreppers. It doesn't give us it does not give us a real answer for the hope that lies inside of us. And that's a problem, because the scripture tells us to be able to do that. All right, so let's continue the video.
Which can pose a major problem for those who believe in creationism. But the theory of evolution is overwhelmingly supported by all the physical evidence we have at our fingertips. One of the main objections to evolution's veracity actually seems to come from a dispute over the meaning of the word theory. Though in the everyday vernacular, using the word theory may imply an unproven idea, in the context of hard science, theory is a word that, according to National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, refers to a comprehensive explanation of some aspect of nature that is supported by a vast body of evidence.
That is the definition of theory in that academic journal. And how many times have you heard people say, well, evolution is a theory, not a fact? That's not handling evidence any better than this person right here is handling evidence. Notice they have said, well, look at all this evidence that it's supported by. And they're going to go through and give us some evidence here in a minute that you're going to see. It's as bad argumentation as I'm accusing Christians of. We need to stop that. It's not, in the end of the day, there's no surprise when the world is muddled and deceived. And when people who choose, as Romans 1 again tells us, to find a way to suppress the truth, that is not surprising. But when people who are of God, for God, with God, want nothing but the truth, engage in this kind of argumentation. In other words, the kind of argumentation that says, well, theory means theory, and therefore you don't have any facts. It's just a blatant abuse of the wording. It's a blatant abuse of the meaning of the word. It's an abuse of the person who uses that word in the meaning and intent that it is. And, and it falls into the category of loving your neighbor, not to abuse people so badly that you're not willing to hear their arguments and give response. So if you're a Christian who's not willing to hear out the arguments, maybe you feel you're not called, maybe you feel you're not able, don't give a response. Turn them to someone who will. Turn them to Dr. Albert Mohler. Turn them to John Piper. Turn them to me. Turn them to Ken Ham. Turn them to... The list goes on and on of people who will provide good, reasonable argumentation in response to this kind of stuff. And no, the people that I listed are not perfect. The point is, we are the ones who can actually do better. If you're trying to suppress the truth, if you're bound up in sin to where you cannot accept any theory about God, then this is the kind of argumentation you would expect. This is the kind of argumentation that they cannot do better, but we can. And you'll notice in the statement, she made a blanket statement in the video here that evolution is a form of science that proves you don't need a God. No, it doesn't. Even if you take evolution at all it is, not one evolutionist or theorist has ever come up with the answer, where does it all come from? So even if you don't deal with the poor use of the fossil record, even if you don't deal with a worldwide flood and all the evidence for it, even if you don't deal with all of the problems in the argumentation, that argumentation alone, anyone can ask this question: where did it all come from? And nobody has an answer. So evolution itself does not prove that there is no God. But instead of saying that, we paint things on our cars about fossil records. Instead of I'm going off the image there in the video. Instead of that, we engage in really abusive argumentation about the word theory. Instead of just simply asking the question, oh, you really believe that this proves there is no God. Okay, where did it all come from? Name one thing in the entire universe that came from nothing. There's no example of that. There's no scientific theory about that. In other words, there's no vast amount of evidence about theory that can support a statement about causality. So we'll continue here.
In fact, the theory of evolution is so well supported by myriad observations and experiments that scientists do not believe there is any evidence that could come to light that would substantially overturn it. And this brings up another creationist topic. Some people believe dinosaurs and humans coexisted. If a person believes that the Bible states only literal truths, this would mean the Earth could only be 6,000 years old and that.
All right. Notice the argumentation again. It's based on these people believe this, therefore it can't be true because we believe this. You haven't been presented with any evidence yet, and you will be given some evidence, false evidence, very soon. But the point is, notice the Creation Science Museum in the background in that video. It's a specific ad hominem attack. Look how stupid these people are for believing this. When behind that facade, of course it's not mentioned. It would damage their argument if it was. But if the person was truly trying to provide any argumentation here, they would mention that there's 180 PhDs that work at that place. People with PhDs. People who work for NASA. People who have invented things that have gone to the moon. Or into space on regular occasions. Very, very smart people that disagree with their position. But notice, because we leave the door open to paint us as stupid, it does damage to all of those people who work very hard to present the truth of God about the fact that the world is only 6,000 years old. And the fact that a worldwide flood makes up for all the cataclysmic or all of the fossil evidence that brings you to that position. And the fact that all of the dating and all of the other things that can be argued or talked about. But, that's straight up bypassed because your average everyday Christian is more interested in the latest episode of what happened on their TV than they are in truly representing their Lord. It's unfathomable to me at some levels. Back to the video.
That humans would have been here the whole time. So if dinosaurs did exist, they obviously must have been around with us, right? They weren't. Dinosaurs famously went extinct about 65 million years ago. Though there is some debate on this issue, modern humans have only existed for around 300,000 years.
Notice a lot of unsubstantiated statements. You can answer all of those statements with simply asking questions. How? Where? What? Why? Matter of fact, they're about to show you a chart of skull remains that have been found. And if you do any research on these, I'm not going to go into it, but you can do your research because this video is not about refuting the evidence here. It's about thinking about it and showing that you need to do your research and that you need to know what you're talking about. But if you go look at these, if you go look up these skull evidence that they have, you will find that there is an explanation for each one of them that have not been proven as false. And there are many on this list that have been proven over several times as false.
Our latest common ancestor with chimps lived around 7 million years ago. Before that, our ancestors were less people-ish and more monkey-ish, and so on, going all the way back to the mammals that did coexist with dinosaurs. There were actually a bunch of different mammals around 65 million years ago. There were shrew-like mammals, lemur-like mammals, monkey-like mammals and squirrel-like mammals, but there were no human-like mammals, and there definitely weren't any humans. But while there are a lot of dinosaur fossils, none of them post-dates 65 million years ago, except there is one way you could argue that we lived and still do live with dinosaurs. Birds! Birds are descendants of the few avian dinosaurs that did manage to make it through the hellish post-asteroidal years. Scientists have uncovered numerous examples of dinosaurs that sported feathers, including this feathered dinosaur tail preserved in amber. Which brings us to the difference between the word hypothesis and theory. A hypothesis is a concept or series of concepts that needs to be tested in order to be proven. Once a hypothesis is proven correct, a body of evidence starts to emerge. Only then do we even get close to what we call a scientific theory. Because while hypotheses are ideas, theories are the explanations of all the hard facts and evidence we've acquired. And
you could argue with the definition of the words that they're using there. But whether you argue with the definition of the words or not, asking simple questions will tear the whole argument apart. How do you know that it was 65 million years ago? How do you know it was only 300,000 years? What about all of the studies that have demonstrated how those skull remains? You know, there was 19 skulls there. We're supposed to base our whole understanding of the history of the human race on. You know, what about all of the studies by PhDs that have demonstrated where those skulls could have come from, or which ones are false? You know, how about responding to some of that? And you can find all of that with just a quick search on the internet. You don't have to be you don't have to be in some academic journal in order to find PhDs responding to these statements. And again, this is about thinking. This is about responding. Your average Christian today, and I'm challenging you, Christian today, will watch through this video and not have hardly any of the thoughts that I'm trying to bring out here. You'll go, oh, it's a theory. It doesn't matter. I've presuppositionally defined that I don't believe this. And you often don't even have the courtesy to ask why. And if you do go look at the video on the channel, feel free to go look at some of the responses by the Christians or people who don't believe in evolution in that thing. And you'll find that almost every single one goes, it's a theory, not a fact. Well, if you define theory in a certain way, sure. But if you engage in fair conversation and respect for the person making the statement and use their definition of theory, that response doesn't mean anything, but besides to prove that they're smarter than you and, again, make the work of many, many people less valuable.
that brings us back to birds and dinosaurs. According to a 2014 research paper by paleontologist Stephen Brusatte, a bird didn't just evolve from a T-Rex overnight, but rather the classic features of birds evolved one by one. The end result is a relatively seamless transition between dinosaurs and birds, so much so that you can't just draw an easy line between these two groups. So while humans didn't coexist with dinosaurs back in the day, we do now, because they're flying all around us. We know this can be a very sensitive issue for some. As long as we remember the importance of facts and science, we can productively coexist. Just don't get sore about it or give each other the silent treatment. We wouldn't want another evolutionary war. That would be terrible. Sorry.
Sorry about the bad switching there and clicking the wrong buttons and all that. I really need a better way to make those changes. I don't think one exists in that program, so one day I'll have like a video board here where I can just push a button and it'll go to the one I want. One day, when I replaced the monitor I burned out the other day. A video full of unsubstantiated facts. Again, I'm not surprised. Any thinking Christian should not be surprised. You know, the question is, are you a thinking Christian? And I would challenge you to be, because there are people who are run over by videos like this. And your simple patience and respect for people, even when they engage in argumentation like that. I wouldn't yell at the person producing this video. I wouldn't call them stupid. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't try to win an argument with them. I would just ask them questions. Why? Where? Who says? And you produce a scientist that says so? Well, here's 12 that say otherwise. This is with gentleness and respect. Again, the point of being a thinking Christian is to fulfill the commandment in Scriptures, to have an answer for the hope that lies within you. Now, if you don't feel like you're capable of that level, quote unquote, of argumentation, your testimony done with humility is all that's required. But you can't engage in that form of argumentation without being ready for it. In other words, when Peter says, be ready to give an answer for what the hope that lies within you, that goes back to what Paul says in Romans chapter 12, where he says to think about yourself sober-mindedly. Know where your argumentation is weak and say, that is not an area where I am capable of having a reasonable discussion with you on. I will refer you to insert any one of the people that you should know that could answer the question. But every single Christian has a testimony of how Christ has changed them as a positive fact. They can tell you who they would have been had Christ not been in their lives. So instead of engaging in responding or giving an answer that a hope that lies within you in an abusive and ridiculous way, instead stay in your lane to where God has called you and give your testimony. And if God has called you to higher level of argumentation, be that person. If God has called you to a simple testimony, be that person. Every member of the body of Christ absolutely counts. And it absolutely counts when even the littlest member of the body of Christ does not act like Christ. With that said, think about that, and God bless.